before Earth had a name. Nothing about this planet was meant to survive, because in its earliest moments there was no light, no air, and no future, only violence drifting endlessly through space. What existed here was not a world, but a collision zone, shaped by forces that erased almost everything they touched. And yet, against every expectation written into the laws of chaos, this became home. To understand Earth, we have to abandon everything familiar and comfortable. Before oceans reflected sunlight, before continents rose above the surface, before life even had a chance to imagine itself, this place was completely unrecognizable. What happened during those first moments still shapes every breath we take today, because the forces that built Earth never disappeared. They only slowed, buried deep beneath our feet. More than 4.5 billion years ago, the universe was quieter, but not peaceful, unfinished. Stars were still forming, and debris circled newborn suns like scattered shrapnel left behind after an explosion. Around one ordinary star, fragments began to collide again and again, slowly drawn together by gravity's silent pull. Dust fused into stone. Stone melted into fire, and heat became the language of creation. There was no Earth yet, only a growing mass that pulled everything toward it without mercy or intention. Each collision released unimaginable energy, heating the surface until nothing solid could remain. The planet never cooled long enough to rest, never stabilized long enough to remember what it had been moments before. There was no sky, no horizon, no sense of direction, only gravity ruling alone. This world had no name because it had no identity. It was not land, and it was not sea. It was motion without pause, a molten sphere reshaped every time something struck it. Asteroids arrived without warning, some adding mass and momentum, others tearing entire layers away, as if testing whether this object deserved to exist at all. What formed next was not planned, guided, or designed. It was accidental, violent, and profoundly unstable. With every impact, the young planet spun faster, storing energy beneath its surface as pressure climbed with nowhere to escape. And slowly, beneath the chaos, something irreversible began to take shape. Deep inside, heavier elements sank while lighter materials rose, organizing themselves for the first time. Layers formed where none had existed before, creating a hidden structure beneath the fire. It was not life, and it was not land, but it was possibility. This was the moment Earth stopped being mere debris and became a system, still hostile, still deadly, but no longer random. The planet had survived its first test, and the universe was not finished with it yet. What followed was not calm or progress, but a deeper descent into instability. As the young planet continued to grow under constant assault, the early solar system was crowded and unforgiving, filled with wandering bodies that crossed paths without warning. Earth existed in the middle of this chaos, absorbing impact after impact, each one rewriting its future in ways no force could predict. Every collision delivered more than mass. It delivered energy, enough to keep the surface in a permanent state of fire. Oceans could not form, air could not linger, and nothing remained unchanged for long. The ground itself behaved like a liquid, flowing, folding, and tearing open under pressure. If something solid tried to exist, it was erased almost immediately. Yet beneath the violence, patterns were quietly emerging. Gravity continued its slow, relentless work, sorting material by weight and behavior. Iron and nickel sank deeper toward the center, forming the beginnings of a dense core, while lighter elements drifted upward. This separation was subtle, almost invisible against the backdrop of destruction, but it marked a turning point. Earth was no longer just collecting material. It was organizing itself. Heat built up faster than it could escape. Radioactive elements buried inside the planet released energy that had nowhere to go, feeding a cycle of internal melting and motion. The interior churned constantly, like a storm trapped beneath a sealed surface. This movement prevented the planet from freezing into a lifeless sphere, keeping it dynamic, unstable, and strangely alive in its own mechanical way. Above the surface, space remained hostile. Objects the size of cities crossed Earth's path at extreme speeds, striking with the force of millions of nuclear weapons. Some impacts reshaped the entire planet, tilting its axis and altering its rotation. Time itself seemed compressed. with centuries of change happening in moments of destruction. Still, Earth endured, not because it was protected, but because it was adaptable. Each catastrophe forced the planet to redistribute energy, restructure its layers, and adjust its balance. The very violence that threatened to destroy, it was also teaching how to survive. What looked like endless punishment was slowly becoming preparation. And soon, one collision would arrive that changed Earth forever. That collision did not announce itself as destiny. It arrived the same way all the others had. Fast, silent, and unstoppable. But this time, the scale was different, and the consequences would echo for billions of years. A planetary body, roughly the size of Mars, crossed Earth's path at precisely the wrong moment, when both objects were still young, molten, and unstable. The impact released more energy than anything Earth had experienced before. In an instant, vast portions of the planet's outer layers were blasted into space, while the surface below liquefied completely. What remained was not devastation alone, but transformation. Debris from both worlds formed a glowing ring around Earth, circling endlessly, cooling slowly, and refusing to fall back immediately. Inside the planet, everything shifted. The core absorbed the shock, redistributing mass and intensifying internal motion. Earth's rotation changed, its axis tilted, and its internal structure was reinforced by the violent mixing of material. The planet did not simply survive the collision, it was rewritten by it. Over time, the orbiting debris began to gather, drawn together by gravity just as Earth itself once had been. Fragments collided, merged, and reshaped themselves, forming a single companion that refused to drift away. This was not a byproduct of chance alone, but the result of precise conditions aligning for just long enough to matter. The newly formed moon altered Earth in subtle but permanent ways. Its gravity stabilized the planet's tilt, preventing extreme shift that could have erased any future balance. It slowed Earth's rapid spin, lengthening days and calming the violence of its rotation. Even the molten interior responded, as tides of rock and magma began to move in rhythm with an external force for the first time. What had once been chaos gained a partner. Earth was no longer alone in its motion through space. The presence of the moon introduced order where none had existed, imposing cycles, rhythms, and predictability on a world that had known only disruption. This was the build-up toward Earth's most important transformation, because with stability came opportunity. And with opportunity, the first chance for something entirely new to begin. With the moon in place, Earth crossed a threshold it could never return from. The constant chaos began to slow, not because the violence ended, but because it finally found balance. The planet's rotation steadied. Its axis held firm. The surface, still molten, now followed predictable rhythms instead of endless disorder. For the first time, Earth could remember its own shape. As heat slowly escaped into space, the outer layers began to harden. Not all at once and not peacefully, but enough for a fragile crust to form and reform again and again. Volcanoes tore through the surface, releasing gases trapped deep inside the planet. These gases did not disappear. They lingered, building the earliest version of an atmosphere where none had existed before. Water arrived in fragments and floods, delivered by icy bodies and released from within the planet itself. It did not settle immediately. It boiled, vanished, and returned countless times. But eventually, the surface cooled just enough for liquid to remain. The planet that had once been nothing, but fire began to hold oceans. This was the true climax of Earth's origin, not the violence, but the restraint that followed it. A world shaped by destruction had learned how to pause, how to stabilize, how to sustain change without collapsing under it. Nothing living existed yet, but the stage was finally set. What makes this moment extraordinary is how fragile it was. A slightly different impact, a slightly different orbit, a minor shift in timing. Any one of these could have erased the future entirely. Earth did not become special because it was designed to. It became special because it survived just long enough for balance to emerge. Today, we walk on solid ground, breathe a stable atmosphere, and measure time in predictable days because of events that almost destroyed everything. Earth's origin is not a story of creation. It is a story of survival, written in fire, shaped by gravity and preserved by chance. Subscribe to join the journey. Before